All right, welcome everyone to the deep dive. Today we're going to be taking a look, a very focused look, I should say,
Yep.
at all the different forces that are shaping the near future. What can we expect to see in 2025? We've pulled together a ton of sources um, from all different perspectives. We've got climate change, global politics, the economy.
hmm
Oh, and we can't forget about the rise of AI.
Yeah, that's right. So it's an opportunity for us to really like connect the dots. We see all these different areas, but they're not really separate, are they?
Not at all.
No, no. And that's kind of what we're aiming to do. It's not just about, listing predictions, but figuring out how these trends interact, What does it all mean when you put it all together? What's the big picture?
Exactly.
Yep.
And that's really what we're trying to give you today, right?
Yeah.
We want to extract those crucial insights, the stuff that'll give you a clear picture of what 2025 might look like without, overwhelming you with a bunch of unnecessary detail.
Right, right. Yeah.
So, okay, let's dive in. And uh, let's start with climate change. I think it's pretty clear from everything we've looked at that the effects we're already seeing, the intense weather, the droughts, all of that, it's likely going to get even worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what really stands out is this increase in extreme weather, and I'm talking about stronger hurricanes, massive wildfires, longer heat waves, and way more coastal flooding. And one of the biggest takeaways here is it's the vulnerability of coastal cities. Some of the projections are suggesting that we could see massive population displacement, like on a scale that we haven't seen before. I mean, rising sea levels, those storm surges, that has a huge impact, not just on the environment, but on housing, infrastructure, social stability, the whole nine yards.
Yeah, it's not just about the immediate disaster, it's the domino effect.
Yeah.
And speaking of domino effects, another thing that the sources really highlighted were those challenges around water and food security. It seems like we can expect more of those intense droughts, those unpredictable rainfall patterns, and, well, that usually means lower crop yields.
Right.
And that's probably going to lead to even higher food prices,
Mm.
especially in those regions that are already, facing food insecurity. And then there's that issue of water scarcity. It's a critical point. I mean, some experts are even suggesting that we could see more conflict, over access to water.
Yeah, I mean, it's a basic necessity. You can see how that could happen. And if you think about it, climate change is really like a multiplier, right? It takes all of those existing global challenges and just amplifies them. It puts so much more strain on these systems that are already so fragile.
It really does.
So when we look at policy, I think the pressure on countries to meet their commitments, under the Paris Agreement, that's only going to increase as we get closer to 2025. There's definitely this growing sense of urgency.
Yeah. Which probably means that we'll see an even bigger push towards renewable energy.
hmm
Solar, wind, hydro, all of that,
Right.
which seems like a good thing, a necessary thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But at the same time, I think the sources are also pretty realistic about this.
Yeah.
They're saying that, completely shifting away from fossil fuels by 2025,
Yeah.
that's probably not going to happen. There's still so much infrastructure, so much reliance on fossil fuels in a lot of places.
Yeah. It's a transition. It's going to take time. And transitions, they're messy, they're complicated. So I think we're going to see stricter regulations, things like emissions, more growth in those sustainable industries as new technologies come up. And, things like carbon trading mechanisms will probably become more important too.
Right, right. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit here. Let's talk about geopolitics. It seems like there's a lot of friction on the global stage. In 2025, it doesn't seem like things are going to get any calmer.
Yeah, I mean, the sources that we looked at, they definitely point to this idea that the tension between major global powers, it's likely to continue. And I mean, in some cases, it could even escalate. Like the relationship between the US and China, for instance, that's definitely one to watch. Trade, Taiwan, the whole tech competition, those are all major points of contention.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, we can't forget about what's happening in Europe. The relationship between Russia and NATO, it's still pretty strained, mostly because of the situation in Ukraine. And that doesn't seem like it's going to resolve itself anytime soon.
No.
And then there's the Middle East, which is, always a region of concern. The Israel-Palestine conflict and the dynamics between Iran and Saudi Arabia,
Mhm.
those are ongoing risks that could have implications on a global scale, especially when you consider the impact on the global oil market.
Right, yeah. And this brings up a really important question about those international institutions. Like how resilient are they? The sources suggest that we might actually see more countries move towards like protectionist trade policies. where they prioritize their own economies.
Yeah.
And that could lead to a more fragmented global economic landscape. And then you have those bodies like the UN, their effectiveness in keeping the peace. That's going to be tested in this environment where there's so much tension. And I think we might also see more political instability, within individual countries, driven by things like elections, economic discontent, and just the ripple effects of global economic downturns.
Yeah, it's all interconnected, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then on top of all of that, we had the increasing importance of cybersecurity, this whole idea of hybrid warfare. It's not just about, traditional military power anymore.
Exactly. I mean, the expectation is that we're going to see even more sophisticated cyber attacks that target critical infrastructure like government systems, financial institutions, the energy grid, even essential services. So nations are going to have to invest even more in their cybersecurity defenses and develop even more digital defense capabilities. But what's really interesting, I think, is the role of AI in all of this. I mean, AI is expected to play a bigger role, both in launching those attacks and in defending against them. And then, there's also the broader application of AI in modern warfare and surveillance.
Right, right. So let's move from geopolitics to the economy. We've been talking about inflation a lot lately, and it seems like it's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, it's going to stick around. I mean, the sources are indicating that a lot of economies are still going to be dealing with the aftermath of all this inflationary pressure that we've seen since the pandemic. And then, you've got those increases in fuel and energy costs, which are partly driven by those geopolitical tensions that we were just talking about. And then there's the potential for more disruptions in the global supply chains, which just adds to the whole problem.
Right. And it seems like the main tool that central banks have been using to try and combat inflation, raising interest rates, well, that has its own set of problems.
It does.
I mean, our sources are suggesting that those higher borrowing costs could actually slow down economic growth.
Yeah, it's a really tough balancing act for central banks. They got to bring inflation under control, but they also don't want to trigger a recession. So it's a really fine line. And the sources are suggesting that if inflation doesn't ease up, some economies might actually experience a mild recession in 2025, simply because those higher interest rates make it so much more expensive to borrow money. And that, of course, reduces economic activity.
Yeah. And what about the job market? I mean, that's so closely tied to the overall health of the economy. What can we expect to see there in 2025?
Well, I think we might see some shifts. The expectation is that companies might start to get a little bit more cautious about hiring. If economic growth slows down, if borrowing costs go up, they might look for ways to cut costs. And one way to do that is to increase automation. In fact, some sources are even suggesting that we could see layoffs in certain sectors that have been growing really fast, like tech and finance. Yeah. So it really highlights this need for people to focus on, upskilling and reskilling themselves, so that they can stay competitive in a job market that's changing so rapidly, both because of the economy and because of technology.
Which brings us to that final area that we wanted to focus on,
Yeah.
the rise of AI and that whole digital transformation that we're seeing. I mean, it feels like this is a force that's influencing so much of what we've already talked about.
It really is. I mean, AI is no longer just this, futuristic concept. It's being integrated into everything, and it's becoming more and more present in our everyday lives. And, one thing that the sources really highlighted was this potential for AI-powered automation to completely transform the job market. I mean, it could take over a lot of those routine tasks, which is directly tied to that need for workforce adaptation that we were just talking about.
Yeah. But it's not all about automation and jobs being lost, right? I mean, there's also this incredible potential for innovation, especially in healthcare. I mean, our sources talked about things like robotic surgeries becoming more common, personalized medicine tailored to individuals, AI being used to make medical diagnoses faster and more accurate. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, it's potentially revolutionary. And the digital economy as a whole, I mean, that's just evolving at an incredible pace. We've got decentralized finance, or DeFi, which is growing rapidly. There's an expectation that we're going to see more regulations for cryptocurrencies as they become more mainstream. And of course, we can't forget about the metaverse and the development of those virtual economies.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is how AI is becoming so integrated into all of these digital experiences. AI-powered customer service, more personalized marketing campaigns, online experiences that are tailored to you. AI is really becoming like the engine behind the digital world.
It is, yeah. But of course, with all of this reliance on digital technologies and with AI becoming more sophisticated,
Yeah.
the threats to cybersecurity also become much greater.
Right. And the sources that we looked at, they're warning about these, AI-powered hacking techniques, which are really hard to detect. And then there are those deep fake scams, which are becoming so realistic. I mean, they could be used for some really malicious
Oh,
purposes.
yeah.
So this is driving a real push for stronger data protection regulations globally. Things like GDPR and new laws that specifically address AI and digital rights. And as we mentioned before, we're also going to see more investment in AI-driven security solutions as organizations try to keep up with all of these evolving threats.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a constant arms race.
It really is. So looking back at this picture of 2025 that we put together, I mean, it's amazing how interconnected all of these different forces are. Climate change, geopolitics, economics, technology. What happens in one area really does have an impact on all the others.
It's all connected. And that's really the key takeaway. We can't analyze any of these things in isolation. They all influence each other. So being adaptable, whether you're an individual, a business, or a government, that's going to be crucial for navigating the complexities of 2025. And global cooperation, especially when it comes to things like climate change and geopolitical stability, that's more important than ever. And finally, the way that we develop and use technology, especially AI, that's going to have a huge impact on society. So we need to be very thoughtful about that.
We do. So here's a final thought for you to consider. Given all this, the advancements in AI, the potential for economic instability, what do you think is the single most valuable skill to have in 2025? Think about all the things that we discussed, the environmental pressures, the global tensions, the shifting economy, the rapid pace of technological change. What's that one core ability that will not only help you weather the storm, but actually help you thrive? It's something to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Thanks for having me. It was a great
It
discussion.
was. We'll see you next time.
See you then.